one of your streams, I kind of noticed a pattern with, or I think it was a debate, yeah, where I see this thing happen, and it's sexism kind of being weaponized as like relatability towards Nazis or towards people who, typically disagree with you. I mentioned this to someone, and they said, "Well, I mean, it's for relatability." One of the debates I'm talking about was a fairly recent one. I forget exactly which one it is, but
It was a Nazi debate on the Crucible.
yes,
Oh, that's the
one.
guy. The most relatable thing I could have done with that guy was drag my knuckles along the ground and eat some dirt. Jesus fucking Christ, that guy was
Not
stupid.
wrong.
Yeah, it was a lot. So, I remember you saying, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but you said like stop acting like a woman because I think he was saying something and you were saying something. I forget the context, but I remembered listening to that and thinking, well, here's the thing, right? If the point is that he's being emotional and making solely emotional arguments, if we can at least see that that's the case, I feel like it is a step too far to say you're just acting like a woman.
Yeah, it's genuinely complicated. The issue is, so the relatability is one thing, and the other one is like strength. So when you're arguing, it really depends on how far along they are politically. I guess I'll start with the strength thing. If you're arguing with people who are neo-Nazis, these people are, I think the term would be, they're like epistemically anti-empiricist, which means that reality doesn't matter to them. This is unfortunately quite common these days. Like on like a fundamental level, they are non-receptive to and uninterested in empirical reality. They have no curiosity for it, and if they encounter something that's inconvenient to them, they won't just like avoid it. They will deny it outright, knowing they have no reason to. Arguing with them on a factual basis is impossible because you might as well be talking to a wall. There's no point. Now, you can't convince the person you're debating to be brought over because especially content creators, like we make our money with our positions. We're not going to be moved over like that. No Nazi is going to give up their like, donation income stream. Like, oh, I'm converted, no, fuck that. They're never going to do that. Their audience, however, is potentially more capable of being moved over. But they're just as bad as he is, at least in terms of the anti-empiricism. My goal when I do stuff like that is to try to like jumpstart or shock some of the intuitive responses they have that condition how respectful they are towards the person they watch. In other words, I want to make him look weak and stupid so they feel weak and stupid for liking him. Unfortunately, nothing makes a far right person feel more weak and stupid than being compared to a woman. That's a fact, That's not it's not an indictment. That is something they feel. It's very clear in their politics. Um, and I've found in the past that like that's the kind of insult they can't really get over. If you're a Nazi, like if you're called stupid or you call them stupid or anything like that, kind of brushes off them because in their head it's just like, oh ha, he's calling me stupid. What is he, some kind of Jew? Like that's what's running in their head. They even have a joke for this, like Jewish lab coats. The idea is like any info they don't like, it's Jewish, right? Like that's where they're at. They don't like being called or being compared to women though, because women are an unavoidable material fact of reality, and it's something they care about a lot. Basically, all Nazis care about women. It's a big part of their philosophy. It's not abstract. It's empirical. It's direct, and it's something they very much do not want to be. And frankly, it seems like half Nazis are repressive trans girls anyway. So there's something to be kicked in with that too, judging from the emails I've gotten from, oh yeah, I used to be an alt-righter and now I've transitioned. Thank you for that. Who knows why people are the way they are. Anyway, the point is it kicks someone, and I've found that it can be really effective in moving people over. And I do know that it gets a bit of a bite and it's regressive, but I figure when we're talking about potentially like moving people over in that way, I don't think there are a lot of other options when it comes to people who are that far right. And the potential benefit of moving anyone over, that's like a life saved kind of, which I think is worth engaging in that kind of language. I can be criticized on the grounds that there are other ways of doing this, but in this specific case, I don't actually think there are. I legitimately think that when you're that far gone, the only real way of sort of jarring people at that point is to use that kind of language because it's It's the only thing that still resonates with an entirely intuition-based belief system. And as for the relatability thing, that's a little bit less defensible, but I still think it's generally pretty useful. It's just about showing them that you're not some like triggered, stiff up their ass SJW who can make a couple jokes. Makes them take you a bit more seriously because they think that you're not totally, drowning in the Kool-Aid.
The only thing that like I feel like is an issue with that is that I think that you kind of are sort of like arbitrarily drawing a distinction between things that you can use that tactic with, like for example using you're acting like a woman right now because like that is more allowable than if you were to necessarily say if you were to like for example say you're acting like an N-word right now, which I feel like would dig just as much, but I think you intuitively know that one is like more okay than the other, but isn't the fact that you are putting down a particular group of people, and in this case it's women, to make this point. Do you think that that's that there is a like that is something that's worth it?
No, I do, yeah. If it saves a life in that respect. Oh, and as for the you're acting like an N-word thing, if it weren't for the woke cancel culture mob, then sure, I'd go that far too. 50 years ago, that probably would have been the equivalent. You imagine? That's some like, what's the name of that guy? The corrupt politician who Shoehead really likes? Fuck.
Oh, it's Huey Long.
Huey Long, that's some Huey Long shit right
Dong.
there. You imagine like some like extremely edgy white guy in 62 arguing with a racist, and the racist is getting all loud and hollering, and you're well, you're acting like an N-word, or something like that. I can imagine back then that being the kicker. I don't really think we're at a point right now where that's the more effective way of engaging in that particular strategy. But no, it's fully the same logic for sure. I try and compensate for this. Obviously, politically and socially, this is a very progressive community. I tend to hit down really hard at anything that looks like actual sexism in my chat. And, that is a potential cost. But I have to wonder, and I gotta say, no way of me empirically determining this, right? I could never actually do the math on it. But there are lots of people in my community who are converted ex-alt-righters. And if I had to put a number to how many of them were moved over, at least in part, because I made a content creator they used to like look like an idiot with that kind of behavior, I wonder if I could put that up against, well, how much like harm have I done in like a sexism kind of way, or like made women feel like trash or anything. I'm sure there have been some to that effect, but for now I feel like that feels like a gamble that leans in more towards the good, but that's just more a product of my observations. I don't think I can really math that out.
I think that there's a criticism specifically from a side of the left that's like the anti-debate left that's like saying like, well, Vaush, you are moving people over to the left, but those people that you're moving over, you're using tactics which are still bigoted, right? Essentially, you're like, whatever, using a sexist way to move a person from being a leftist to being a sexist left-winger. You know what I mean? And I think that like from a utilitarian perspective, it's like, okay, well, they're no longer a fascist, so isn't that better? However, isn't there a problem there that you might be reinforcing those kinds of hierarchies that will remain like even after somebody's like no longer been a fascist?
Sure, I would say that if I had sexist left-wingers in my community, but I don't think it leads to that. I think it's a jolt right then that maybe sets somebody down the road of being more accepting of left-leaning politics, and in that process, they soften up on the gender politics as well. So I don't think the trade-off stays. I think when you're in the community, you're necessarily a pro-feminist. At the very least, I don't see any pushback from my community on the feminist issues. There are always the main pushback I see is from like young people. I have 14-year-old boys in the community don't get this or that about women's experiences, and that's just a part of life. It takes time for everyone to learn. I don't know if there's like a kind of principle trade-off that's happening though. It's just more of a like shock. But keep in mind the shock of like, oh, well, he just made a sexist joke, or whatever imagined consequences there would be of that. That's the point of it, right? I mean, the shock of implementing that language from a left-leaning person is part of the thing that makes them look more humiliating in comparison. Imagine being a neo-Nazi and having a socialist turn up to make fun of you by comparing you to a woman. It emasculates them. And that's, honest to God, I think emasculation is the only politics these dipshits recognize. once they're that far over. It's a way of destabilizing them and maybe getting them to, at least the followers, the viewers on their side, to reconsider, you know, well, why do I actually give a shit what this guy has to say about the Jews or the banking system or whatever? You know, why do I think this guy is advocating for the apex of masculine behavior when he just got called a soy boy by a lefty? Anyway, yeah, it's difficult for me to defend, not because I don't believe in it, but because we're basically just arguing vibes, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, like, you saying that, like, oh, calling him a soy boy, that would also sort of like fall under a spectrum of like what is allowable, right? Which is like I would say that like the thing that we're arguing about is like calling somebody a woman as like a tactic might not be the most useful thing, or they might have problems with it, but like neither of us would disagree with that. Like calling a right winger a soy boy, you know what I mean? Which is essentially calling them weak and I guess in a way feminine.
Right? No, it always
Yeah.
hits back to that, doesn't it? It's pretty unavoidable, unfortunately. If you want to get a right winger's goat, you got to hit him like that. Unfortunately, it's not like you're gonna arrive at any other, you know, argumentative tactic that'll upset them, because they're they're pretty disconnected from reality. It's unfortunate. It wasn't always like that, by the way. I swear to God. Maybe this isn't the world that the two of you are going to grow up into, but even at the beginning of my channel, back in mid-Trump presidency, conservatives were still interested in discussing the empirics on at least some social issues. I remember having those discussions, but now I don't see them anywhere. It's all just dogmatism. So the world you two are going to grow up into is just going to be ever so slightly worse than the one that I graduated into.